Welcome to Take Notice, Amplifying Black Stories. I'm your host, Allison Preisinger-Higgins. Take Notice, Amplifying Black Stories is a podcast exploring society, culture, and current events through conversation. We aspire to create an open, respectful, and equitable space where guests may feel free to share their truth and lived experiences. Our core values are rooted in community, connection, and personal development. Stories help us learn, relate, and grow. We are here to listen, to take notice. Thank you for being with us. I would like to acknowledge the land on which this episode was created. I would like to show gratitude to the traditional ancestral land of the Shoalwater Bay and Chinook tribes, recognizing that these names are not the original names of the people of these areas. Land acknowledgement statements are an important part of honoring those whose land we now live and work on. We begin each episode this way to help spark ideas and keep these conversations in the front of our minds so that we may continue to be open to doing better. As I continue to learn how to better acknowledge Native people of these lands, I will adjust the wording of the beginning of each episode. I encourage listeners to research the land on which you live and are listening right now. Recognizing this is just the beginning. Welcome. We are so happy to be returning with Take Notice, Amplifying Black Stories Season 2. Thank you for listening and thank you for your support throughout Season 1 and now. You will hear a few updates this season as we continue to grow and evolve as a show, but the main goal is still the same, to listen and to hold space for folks who would like to use this platform to share their stories. Our first episode of the season is with the creator and executive producer of the children's television show Look, Listen, and Learn, Val Thomas-Matson. Val and I had a fantastic conversation on her surroundings growing up, family, and the creation of Look, Listen, and Learn. After a bit of a break, I feel like I'm still getting my interviewing sea legs back, but that didn't matter so much because Val is a wealth of stories and knowledge. There is so much in her background that we didn't get to, and as it is with all of my guests, I wish we had had more time. Val is a community organizer and activist with deep experience in media. In addition to early work at King TV, she created, produced, and hosted the daily community affairs talk show Communities in Action for King County Government TV for 3 years. She has also worked extensively with the multi-award-winning production company North by Northwest, serving as co-host on Washington Grown, and managing video production elements for educational, nonprofit, and government video campaigns. We discuss her most recent endeavor in this episode, which is Look, Listen, and Learn. Look, Listen, and Learn supports the emotional well-being of Black, Indigenous, and people of color families by offering fun in-home learning tools for 3 to 8-year-olds. Look, Listen, and Learn exists at the intersection of arts, media, education, and racial justice by providing culturally relevant storytelling, fundamental social emotional skills, and critical messages of love and hope. Please enjoy my conversation with Val Thomas-Matson. Val, thank you for being here with me, taking the time and being flexible with our schedules. I really appreciate it. How are you? I know it's a big question, but
So I am well and just feeling in gratitude for the opportunity for this conversation. So thank you for that.
absolutely. I am too. Thank you. Maybe we just get started with, did you grow up in the Seattle area or where did you grow up?
I grew up, I like to tell folks, I was born, reared, and raised and hope to die close by, Seattle, Washington.
Nice.
So
Yeah.
I am one of those few and chosen Black women who grew up in the central area. I grew up behind Mount Zion Baptist Church on 19th, or 20th actually, 1626 20th Avenue, right off of Madison.
Oh, nice.
And
Okay.
I have spent my entire life here, and even went to college in the area up in Bellingham. So yeah, born and raised, and hope to die close by Seattle.
Oh, I love that. Yeah. I was born in Seattle, drifted away and came back, but
Ah.
currently I'm out at the ocean, so I guess I can't say that I'm in Seattle, but
But you're in the flow, so
yeah.
it's all good.
Exactly.
Uh,
What school up in Bellingham? Was it Western or?
Yeah, went to Western Washington University. I
Oh,
loved
nice.
Western Washington University. It was one of the places as a young Black woman where I felt a little bit more acceptance
Mm,
than in some other areas of our state that I was really surprised by. So I had a pretty welcoming experience up in Bellingham, and yeah, have great and fond memories of it.
awesome. That's actually especially nice for me to hear because my stepdaughter is going there and is getting ready to start up her sophomore year. So that's really nice to hear.
Well,
I'll have
go
to share that with
Viking.
her.
Go
Yeah, right?
Viking.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Wonderful.
I'm honored to say I was just featured in, I'll be featured in the fall 2021 version of the alumni magazine there.
Oh,
So,
okay. Okay.
yeah, Western's a very special community, and their outreach to alumni is right up there with some of the best, I would imagine. And it's
Oh,
great to still
wonderful.
have that connection after all these years.
Yeah, yeah. We'll have to have an eye out for that. That's awesome. Really great to hear. And who were you surrounded by growing up in the central area of Seattle?
I grew up in a very full community. Of course, looking back on it now, there was my mother and my father and my siblings. We all lived together at 1626, as I noted
Mhm.
earlier. And right next door was Grandma and Grandpa Jefferson. So those were my father's parents. My grandmother remarried, and she married Mr. Jefferson. And I always used to tell folks her first husband's name was Thomas. So I told them not to mess with me because I was a descendant of Thomas Jefferson,
Oh,
sorta. By way of my grandmother's marriages, you know how we kids like to get those things all tumbled up.
yeah, yeah.
Um, but that was the immediate family. My nuclear family, and then my extended family or my grandparents lived right next door, so there was no misbehaving.
Oh,
On
sure.
top of that, as I also said, I was across the street from Mount Zion Baptist Church, where my father was one of the assistant pastors there. So he was the
Oh.
junior church minister. So I could not turn anywhere, right, on my street without somebody being there to correct me.
Yeah. No hiding from anything.
No hiding. That's Reverend Thomas' little girl. You better watch out. You better make sure. Oh, God. Really?
That's hilarious.
It's true.
Oh, I bet. That's great.
Uh,
Oh, that's wonderful though to be around, so much family and having your grandparents right next door. That's
Yeah.
awesome. Yeah.
Looking back on it, it really was one of those things I took for granted probably growing up that
Mm,
I can look back on now very fondly of. And in addition to my paternal grandparents being with us, when we did finally move, when I went to fifth grade and moved to the Seward Park area, my mother's parents moved into the home with us. So I had then my maternal grandparents
oh,
lived with
nice.
us.
Yeah.
So again, looking back, just very grateful for the things I didn't really appreciate fully at the time. But having all four of my grandparents live with us
Mhm.
really was a treat to be able to look back on.
Yeah, that's really special. And how would you know as a kid, you know?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, yeah.
that's
But
wonderful though.
I
Yeah.
love looking back on the strength of the women in my family.
Mm.
I think about the journey my mother made. My mother's from Nashville, Tennessee, and had to move up here to be with my father, who was in the seminary, or going to the seminary. And during the 50s, right, where blacks had to travel, well, they traveled by train,
Mm.
and so they were in the black folks section, and she was pregnant, and had just had me. And my
Mm.
father was in seminary down in Tennessee, where my mother's people also lived. So they made that journey back and forth because
Oh,
my
wow,
father's
yeah.
people lived here. So just as I got older, just looking into that very rich history, my father went to the seminary down in Nashville, the first Black Baptist seminary that I know of, where a lot of greats came from that school. My godfather, Gilby Lloyd, also John Lewis, and lots of other
Mm.
pillars in the civil rights movement came from, that Tennessee area, right? But then just thinking about my grandmothers, both women who worked outside of the home, and yet also kept these really great houses going. When I look back on it, there was just so many little and big wondrous things that they made sure to bestow upon us that I know that my sisters and I are eternally grateful for.
Yeah, I bet. Wow. And did your parents meet in Tennessee, or how did they meet?
Yeah, my parents actually met in Tennessee. My father's family had moved here to Seattle, and my father was attending Mount Zion Baptist Church, and the minister at the time there was my godfather, Reverend Gilby Lloyd, who was from Nashville, Tennessee, but was now working at Mount Zion in Seattle. He and my dad became really great friends, and my godfather encouraged my dad to go into the ministry. Nowadays, my godfather would be called my father's mentor, but he was always godfather to us. And so,
Mhm.
godfather was from Nashville, Tennessee, and went to Olivet Baptist Church down in Nashville. Well, lo and behold, my mother's family, which is from Nashville, also went to this same church. And so my godfather knew of my mother's family, the Insleys, and my mother and my aunt were actually under the tutelage of my godfather's sister, who was the choir director at the church.
Oh, okay.
Anyhow, so that's what's going on in Tennessee. Meanwhile, back
Mhm.
here in Seattle, Godfather and my father are meeting up. And my godfather sees that my father is called to the ministry, and he basically sets it up for my father to go to seminary down in Nashville, Tennessee. And I believe the story is my father was waiting for a bus. And wherever this bus was, that's where he and my mom met. So it was a
Aw.
literal pickup, is how I tell the story. They don't tell it that way, but I tell it
Sure.
that way. But that's how they met, was through Olivet
Oh,
Baptist
wow.
Church down in Nashville, Tennessee,
Mhm.
and it's a kind of a glorious story because my godfather really was my godfather. He and my godmother watched over my parents and were there to usher us into me particularly into this world, as well as my other siblings,
Mm.
and they watched over us for the rest of their lives here on earth. And I remember when my husband and I got together, my husband's family was like, "Well, why do you always call him Godfather? Why don't you call him Gil?" I'm like, Stop. You are cussing in front of me, okay?" You just do not understand. This is
Yeah.
Godfather, and Godmother. Question never came up again.
Yeah, right. Don't even ask.
Don't
Yep.
even ask.
That's great. Oh, that's really special. Yeah. So how many siblings did you have growing up, or do you have?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's such an interesting, that's a moving question for me.
Oh, okay.
There were in my immediate family four children my parents had. However, and I was the eldest, and next was my sister Marcia, and she and I were probably I think we're about 18 months, maybe 19 months apart. And she was born with full on sickle cell anemia in
Mm,
1961. The year and a half afterwards, my parents had their only son, Cedric Abel. He was also born with sickle cell anemia.
mm,
And he died, and I think he died in 63. I think I've got my
mm,
math right. So he was not very old. At the time that Cedric died, Marcy was sick, and it was at that point she was diagnosed with sickle cell anemia. And then in 1965, we welcomed my baby sister, Sonia Yvette. And Marcia was also to pass of sickle cell anemia in 1986. And so
mm,
today you have what I call the bookends. Myself, the
mm,
eldest, and my youngest sister, Sonia, are survivors.
Yeah, I'm sorry to hear that. Yeah, that must have been a rough journey.
Yeah, yeah, it was a lot. It was a lot of loss. Looking back on that part of my story, really is the impetus for part of where I'm at in my journey today.
Mhm.
At the time my sister was diagnosed with sickle cell anemia, my father had graduated from seminary and had been called to his first church in Spokane, Washington. And so my brother was in the hospital and dying, basically. And
Mm.
at the time, my sister became sick. And my dad told the story that it was an intern that came to him and said, I believe this is what we're dealing with, sickle cell anemia. It's something that we studied. And I
Mm.
just don't think you guys are going to get good health care over here. I would get yourselves back to Seattle area.
Oh,
So my
okay.
dad left his calling, the church, New Hope Baptist Church in Spokane, Washington, and came back to Seattle so that we could become, so we could enroll with Seattle Children's, and that's what we did.
Mm.
Um, and Yeah, it was one of those stories, one of the very first stories I remember hearing of our family's issues around, race and healthcare.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Right, and there's stories surrounding Seattle Children's nowadays,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
So yeah, and I
Mhm.
don't know enough about it to go into it
Mhm.
really myself,
Yeah.
but yeah, that's, yeah, I can only imagine. Yeah.
Yeah, I think, yes, I'm very much aware of what's going on at Seattle Children's now right now. And what I have to say is I think Children's, in my experience, is lucky and just downright fortunate to be able to have some of their staff that get it, that are there
Mm,
to live out their calling, to be of service through providing health services to other folks. Unfortunately, the administration does
mm,
not have that as a value that they know how to instill into every one of their staff. So it looks great written down on paper. It's something you can buy ads for. You can put on a billboard that you got this, you got that. But if you
right.
don't have that systematized, um, where you can make sure that that value rings out for everyone, then you cannot lay claim to this
Mhm,
ubiquitous notion of equity. And it doesn't need to be ubiquitous, but it becomes maybe ubiquitous because you have not systematized it yet.
mhm. Yeah, yeah, folks that are working in the trenches can only do so much if
Right.
the wrong things are being
Right. The
dropped down to
systems
them,
and the
yeah,
policies aren't in place that said,
right.
this is what we will do. This and this is not what we won't do. This is a value. This and this is not a value. So
Mhm,
we had just lovely, I'm remembering as my sister was, when she was passing, when she was transpiring, and she at the time was 25, and I believe the age was 21 when Children's Hospital kind of graduates you out. But because
mm,
Marcy had been there through all of her life, some of the doctors actually worked with the doctors at University Hospital. The doctors from Children's worked with some of the doctors at University Hospital to make that transition for us better. And so those doctors from Children actually checked in on us at University Hospital. And I remember in her transpiring, we had a really good experience. Very bittersweet, but felt
sure.
very supported. And you can believe that I'm just really sorry to hear that not all families can count on that experience now at Children's Hospital, and
Right.
particularly because Dr. Danielson is no longer there at Odessa Brown, and some of the fine people that rallied around him and worked with him. That is such a loss, and I'm just so heartbroken that the administration at Children's cannot reconcile that great of a loss. Sent
Mhm.
such a resounding message through our communities, and it grieves me deeply because I'm 62 years old and I grew up at Children's in Odessa Brown. And the first medical director there, Dr. Levisio, was my pediatrician, was my sister's
Oh,
pediatrician. So
mm,
when I say that I feel like I have a story with Children's, and I feel like I have a legacy with them, or they have a legacy with us, it does break my heart that things are as they are right now. But hopefully, they can find a way to make a turn and really embrace the values of healthcare and dignity for all.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Hopefully there's a shift that's coming. Mhm. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Let me see if I heard you correctly. Was it your brother who was
Mm,
youngest when
mhm,
he passed?
mhm.
So were you all still you weren't in the Seattle area at that time, is that
No,
right?
he passed
Right.
in Spokane, Washington,
Mm,
and I don't remember how we made it back to Seattle. I'm guessing we probably drove, but I have no idea.
sure, yeah.
But I remember getting back to Seattle, and like I said, we moved in to our grandparent Jeffersons next door to them.
Mm, okay, yeah,
And then, yeah, I just remember a
yeah.
lot. I remember Wednesdays at Children's. Marcy she had allergies. She'd have to get an allergy shot. Sometimes she'd have to get blood transfusions because of
Mm,
sickle cell to
okay.
make sure she had healthier blood cells that were
Mm,
regenerating. So just weekly visits to Children's was just a part of our lives.
wow. Yeah, so you kind of just build a community within that
Hmm.
space, I imagine.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Mm. That's a strong connection.
Yeah,
Yeah. Is your sister it's your younger
my baby
sister?
sister. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
is she still in the Seattle area as well, or
She's down in Florida doing whatever they do down
Ah,
there in Florida, Lord knows.
there you go.
Let's not even go there.
That's great. Oh, goodness.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
yeah. Oh, it's wonderful.
Mhm.
Did your mom, work outside of the home as well, or did she,
Yeah,
okay, what did she do?
all the women in my family did both. I remember when I got together with my husband and his mother didn't work outside the home. I'm like, really? How did they do that? What did they do?
Did
They
you get
just
bored?
raised kids? That's all?
What is
Wow.
this?
I'm like,
Yeah.
"Oh, I see. That's the good old American dream." But yeah, all of the women in my family work. My mother actually taught adult basic education at Seattle Central Community College.
Oh, great. Yeah.
Yeah, so again, just having that richness in my life growing up as a young Black woman that my mother's teaching multilingual folks, their
Mhm.
ABCs and one, two, threes,
Yeah.
and just the richness that that brought into our home, learning about all, some of these different cultures and ways of doing things and different foods, because they wanted to thank Mrs. Thomas for X, Y, and Z.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so
Oh,
it was
that's
great.
awesome.
Yeah.
That
We're
sounds great.
yeah,
Yeah.
had some good
So many
memories.
new Yeah, I bet. Yeah, a lot of different influences. Yeah, and it sounds like your parents, both in what they did with their careers, influenced you in yours in some way, it seems like, so maybe you can share a little bit about what you are up to now and what you do.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I learned from my dad, and I remember people used to say this, is that your dad is just so friendly. He just never meets a stranger, does he? And I just remember my dad. Now, my dad still had a full time job, even though he worked at Mount Zion. He still worked for the distribution department at University of Washington,
Oh, okay.
and I loved his job because he would come home with all these office supplies, and my sister and I would play office. We had our little steno pads and our little Bic
Oh,
pens, and we were
nice.
just so cool. And our big erasers, we just loved office supplies. But again, my dad would meet so many different people. I remember he came home one time with this old, oh, what was he? A fix it up man, Mr. Taylor. And Mr. Taylor drove this old raggedy white truck, but he was just so nice to us. And he'd help my dad, with little projects around the house. And then I remember we had an African foreign student living in our house for like a week or something like that. My dad, took
Oh,
this guy
okay.
in, and then there was a new Filipino gentleman who was working with my dad at the University of Washington, and his family wasn't here yet, and he came
Mm,
over. I mean, there was just this cast of characters always coming through, and
mhm.
I was just always so well, I should say as an adult, I'm just really grateful for that exposure. It was just so great when, again, when we moved from the central area and we moved to Sword Park, we moved into a neighborhood that had two synagogues and they were building their third. So
Oh,
I
wow.
grew
Yeah.
up watching folks walk to temple on Saturdays and Friday
Mhm.
evenings, for their Sabbath. This neighborhood that we moved into was seriously multicultural. I was part of a little campfire girls group, and I think there were maybe three black girls. There was probably a group about 12, maybe 15 of us, and we had about three black girls, about probably half a dozen type of Asian and Pacific Islander folks, and then I think we had maybe one or two white girls. I mean, so it wasn't the usual, but we thought
Yeah,
it was
yeah.
the usual.
Sure. Yeah.
And we shared each other's cultures and holidays and foods. And lo and behold, our parents' craziness all was the same, even
Yeah.
though we came from these different cultures. And these sisters and brothers, they all had the same issues, no matter
Yeah.
where we came
Yes.
from. But I remember my dad saying that he strongly believed that the cure for racism was the breaking down of these cultural divides. Because as long as we stayed segregated amongst ourselves as people of color, that slavery could continue. Its holds on us because we continue to keep these walls up. And so my
Mm.
dad was probably well, not probably, my dad was the very first champion and person in my life who really spoke to this need of equality and equity and justice for everybody. And until the least of us was granted, these rights, all of us suffered. And here we are, 2021. We are still suffering because that is not a message that we understand
Mhm.
to and with each other. And so that was really one of the founding principles of what I knew I wanted to offer up to young people in early learning education. I talk a lot about the fact that I did not have the best start to school. I wasn't the brightest, and I didn't learn the fastest. And I didn't know who to take that to. My parents were already burdened with taking care of my siblings, and
Mm.
I knew as the eldest that I had to help in whatever way I could. And that wasn't sharing that I wasn't understanding my multiplications. That wasn't
Mm.
sharing that I wasn't, doing whatever it was that I needed to do confidently. I just did not take that to my parents. And so that was something that I took on very early, wanting to be right, wanting to do right, but not feeling right because of some of these external pressures that society puts on us. And then sometimes or oftentimes doesn't give us a place to express that or share that. And I was fascinated as I left college. I was fascinated with brain science as I was leaving college to begin to learn that there were things that we could do even prenatally, and in before kids got to kindergarten, pre-K, that there were ways that we could begin to talk and interact with kids in ways that set them up for greater success all around, scholastically as well as emotionally and socially.
Mm.
And I think I learned all of those things through osmosis and through community, which I was steeped in, and I had a very rich community from which to learn from. But I really felt there could be more intentionality around helping families and children to get a good start. And in watching shows like Mr. Rogers and Sesame Street and Electric Company and the Newsoo Review, I saw these different ways of using media to interact and engage children and families in learning. And I thought, you know what? I could do that. And so very early on in college, I felt this calling to get into media, but not in any of the traditional ways. But I was really fortunate to begin my career at Como TV in Seattle as an intern. And so I always loved media. I loved broadcasting because you could get the message out to so many people. And I just really believed in getting these messages for good out there. I wanted them just, singing and reverberating throughout communities, that together we're better and stronger. And I just didn't understand why television couldn't be that town crier for good.
Mhm.
So all of that influenced, and is part of what helped birth Look, Listen, and Learn.
Yeah, and Look, Listen, and Learn. How long have you been working on that now?
Um, when I have a notepad here with some of my original notes, and I think 2003 was when I came up with the name Look, Listen, and Learn
Ah.
officially.
Uh-huh.
But I did know in college, and I left Western in '81 officially. I did know then that I was interested in doing a Mister Rogers show. In fact, I talked to friends about it. I could just call it Mrs. Rogers, and they're like, "No, no, Val, you can't." Well, why not? So Look, Listen, and Learn has now been a part of my psyche, really, Allison, for more than 30 years at this point.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
and it took up until 2018, until we were able to find the funding we needed to bring it to fruition. That's a
Oh,
mighty
wow.
long journey.
Yeah. It sure is, yeah. But really a testament to how important it is if it's stuck around for that long within your being, and
Yeah,
then it's wonderful that it was able to get going, yeah.
yeah.
And it's only been, what is that, 3 years now?
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
3 years, we have been in production, and we now have 2 seasons of 13
Okay.
episodes, so there are 26 episodes,
Oh,
well, we're still in
yes.
season 2, out
Sure.
there, and we will begin filming, season 3 a little later on this year and finishing up next year.
Wonderful.
So
Wonderful.
yeah,
That's
yeah,
exciting.
yeah. I like to share with folks that, we hear a lot of times about people struggling to determine what it is that they want to do for a career. And they spend their whole lives like, well, what do I want to do when I grow up? And I like sharing that just because you know what you want to do doesn't mean that you're going to get to do what you want to do. And I'm such an example of that. But
Mm,
I think the other part of that story is even though you don't know what you want to do or you do know what you want to do, either way, you still have to make a conscious choice every day to keep going forward and to trust, just to keep trusting that day by day that somehow this particle that you're living will begin to be a thread, and that thread will be able to hook up with other things. And before you know it, there is a pattern, there is a tapestry that is revealing. And that's certainly my story. When I look back on my life, I can see all these different components that didn't make sense at the time. They're now instrumental in feeding what we're doing with Look, Listen, and Learn.
mm,
So I just, again, feel so grateful for Look, Listen, and Learn and opportunities like this to talk with you, Allison, and just reflect and give praise and gratitude and maybe hope, to some folks who are struggling, to really let them know that hope is the least common denominator that we will start with, and just keep going day by day.
absolutely. Yeah. What is one example of one of those components that you're mentioning, for you? I'm curious, yeah.
Um, wow, there's so many.
I'm
There's
sure, yeah.
so many.
I know, I definitely relate to it, so I'm curious.
Well, I think one of those things. Which one do I choose? Oh, just pick one. Val.
You
Okay.
can do more than one if you want.
Okay. Well, one of them is the places that you see on Look, Listen, and Learn TV.
Oh, yeah,
I
okay.
remember talking about the fact that Sesame Street is a wonderful show, but I cannot tell you anything about the things that those places that you'll see on Sesame Street.
Oh, yeah.
But you can go and you can see all the places that we share with you on Look, Listen, and Learn TV. And that's
Oh.
really intentional because in Black communities and Native communities and communities of color, we all know, and other communities too, all know that there are places, and I'll just use Black folks since that's what I am, but there are places where Black folks could not go. In fact, we were discouraged from learning. Even something as innocuous as a bookstore. I was in a Barnes and Nobles and I saw this happening, and there was a white mother and a little white boy, and they were down there pulling out all these books from the bottom shelf, and they were just having a great time. And then I looked across, and there was a Latina mother with her child, chastising her child not to pull the books out. Be careful not to touch them.
Mm.
Be careful not to play with them. Be careful. And I just remember that moment, was just so pivotal for me because it I knew what that mother was doing, but I'm also the person that just was reading about this brain development research talking about the fact that kids need to be able to explore their worlds and touch and see and understand their limits and their boundaries and other people's limits and boundaries. And yet as a Black, child, I was taught very carefully not to do that, not to explore freely, to be
Mm.
careful where I explored, or be careful where I partook, but be careful of where I played, because it wasn't always going to be safe, or I was not always going to be welcome. And so the
Mhm.
places that we highlight on Look, Listen, and Learn, we take very seriously because we want our families to know that these are places where you can go and replicate this experience. And so when we are working with the places that you'll see on Look, Listen, and Learn TV, our libraries, the different vendors, the art studios, the museums, you want to keep seeing these places in our show season after season after season because you know these are places that you can go and have these experiences. But
Mm.
I also want to say that you want to be mindful to also notice maybe where we were in season 1 is not where we're going to be in season 3. And for parents and caring adults, pay attention to that. There are places where we were in season 1 that we're not in season 3 because they have not been able to embrace equity. They have not been able to embrace Black Lives
Mm.
Matter. They have not been able
Mm.
to embrace this fundamental principle for us. So where they are wonderful organizations and they provide services, they are not aligned yet with our principles.
Mhm.
But there are plenty of places that you'll see, I'm happy to say, most of them that you'll see are reoccurring places that we can share with you. And these are places where we want our families to go. So that's just one of those subtle ways that some of those early experiences I had have translated for us into the show.
Sure. Yeah.
I think another important one was I knew there wasn't a lot of funding out there for children's programming. People talk about early learning, people talk about education, but there are many stipulations on this money. It is not even funny.
Mm.
It We really have monetized early learning for wealthy people. And so, one of the things that we struggled with long and hard and continue with is really understanding how are we going to get the message out to our communities. And so a lot of the work that I did prior to Look, Listen, and Learn, it was around community organizing, it was outreach, and it was also some media production and event planning. Well, lo and behold, all of those community-based organizations are now places where we've reached back to with Look, Listen, and Learn to partner with. And that's where we get our children and our families that we feature on the show. And that's such a gift because then those agencies are the ones that are excited about having their little ones or their families represented on the show. And then they tell two folks, and then they tell two folks,
Sure.
and they tell two folks. And, nothing is. is like that word of mouth in community. It's
Mm-hmm.
raw, it's authentic, it's real.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's a very big value for us, and another place where we've been able to weave all of those connections. I mean, over 25 years of community organizing and outreach are now being poured into Look, Listen, and Learn.
That's exciting. Yeah. Yeah, and if it had started earlier, it would have been a little bit more of it would have been a different experience, I imagine, for
Yeah,
sure. Yeah.
it would have been a really different
Mhm.
experience. Another last one I'll share with you is when we started with Look, Listen, and Learn, we didn't have YouTube,
Oh.
right?
Oh, yeah, that's
So when
true. Yeah,
I first started, with the concept of Look, Listen, and Learn,
right.
like, even as late as 2003, my vision for the show was to go on government TV because we didn't have to pay the commercial rates, and also you can air the show more than once a day, and there were these airwaves out here that needed to be used that people weren't using, and so I wanted to help drive folks to their government stations with this early education show that they could see more than once a day. And that's how we started. So we're on the Seattle channel, we're on King County station, and we're in a lot of different places now. Even Colorado's picked us up. They don't even care
Oh.
that it's featuring King County. They're like, we
Oh,
just
yeah.
want the content.
There you go.
But we also received Telly Awards, which is an international media award. Why?
Mm.
Because we're on YouTube. And so 5 other countries now have weighed in on Look, Listen, and Learn.
Oh,
That would
that's
not have
great.
been possible in 2003. And so
Yeah.
again, when I talk about this hope and this trust, even though it doesn't make sense at the time why something isn't happening, we have to find a way to move forward, hold on, and just believe that somehow it can be reconciled.
Mhm. Everything kind of pieces together. Yeah, absolutely. That sounds like a really great show, and I have to check it out. I'm excited to share it with my nephews as well.
Well, we're excited to have y'all check us out.
Yeah, yeah.
I would just invite folks to check us out on YouTube. You can find us just by going to our website at looklistenandlearn.org. You can find out a lot more about us. We're really happy that we've worked to make sure that our board is over 80% people of color, and our staff is more than half or is over half people of color. And these are
Mm,
intentions that we've set out for ourselves to stay true to making sure that Look, Listen, and Learn speaks to Black, Indigenous, and people of color. My earliest or one of my earliest inspirations for the show is in having grown up in the state of Washington, the education disproportionality for Black and Native Americans continues to grow. I'm 60 something years old. Where in life does a gap continue to grow? I like to tell people, you got a gap in your tooth, you usually fix that. You got a gap in your britches, you fix that. You got a gap in your doorway, you get something up there to fill that
mhm.
gap. How is it that in
Yeah.
our state we have not fixed that gap? And if we haven't fixed that gap for Black and Indigenous who speak English, what the
Mm.
heck are we queuing up for our brothers and sisters who are multilingual?
Mhm.
And so please check us out and our values. You can like us on Facebook, poke us on Instagram, tweak us, just get out there, do all the things you need
All
to
the
do
stuff.
on social media at looklistenandlearn.org. And then check us out on YouTube. We're free and we're available 24/7. And at the end of each of our shows, which is grounded in a book by an author of color, we pick a social emotional theme. We usually read the story. We build in an art segment, a cooking segment, and at the very end, there's a parent tip. So that's
Mm.
a notice there for the adults of how they can reinforce that social emotional theme that we're talking about on that day. So please visit our website. That's what I ask folks to do.
It's exciting that it's available on YouTube and free, so really anybody, if they wanted
Anybody.
to, could watch it,
Mhm,
which is amazing.
mhm,
Yeah.
mhm.
I'm very excited to check it out, and we will have the information to find it on our show notes as well, so anybody that's listening can just look in the description and find you. So,
Great.
Yeah, and we did discuss a little bit about your influences and everything. Maybe that kind of covered this question that I ask everybody, but who was an influential person in your life?
I have to say, I have lots of answers for that, but one of my all-time favorites is Dr. Maya Angelou.
Mm,
I just love her story. I Know Why the Cage Bird Sings. I remember reading that as a girl, and it just sat with me. All the grief and the sorrow, but also how how she overcame and where she is in life now. I know she's moved on to another realm, but she is still very much with me and with, I think, a lot of us. Her influences are just everywhere. And she continues to reach out and poke. I could just feel her nudging and poking, and I can feel that smile, and I can hear her say, "Well done." I was watching my friend who is a harpist,
mm,
and she was I was watching her in a virtual concert the other day, and she has the gift of a ring that was Dr. Angelou's, that Dr.
mm,
Angelou gifted to her. And I was just watching this ring as my friend's fingers were strumming the strings of this harp. And I was just having this incredible moment, even in just sharing the story. And so that's why I say she is still very much with us. And just her life, she did it all. She danced, she cooked, she loved, she cussed, she ate with presidents. She did it all. And she is just my visual of a Black woman. And Black women, our story is so rich and it's so deep, and we work so hard. Maya illuminates that, but she also illuminates this joy that I hope I get to share and be a part of modeling for folks as well.
mm. Yeah, she's definitely still around.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. So we can find Look, Listen, and Learn on YouTube and a bunch of other spaces, and we'll
Yeah.
have that on there. Is there any other organization or business that you feel moved to share or
Oh, Allison, that's a loaded question for the end of a conversation.
right? We could go on
We
forever.
could go on forever. I guess I just have to give a quick shout out to my sisterhood. I am very honored to be a member of Alpha Kappa Alpha Incorporated, Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated.
Mm,
And again, another group of powerful, humble, beautiful, talented Black women that also continue to help keep me lifted up and on the right path.
mm, wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you for your time and for sharing your story and your thoughts with us for this podcast. And I'm really happy to have met you today, and glad this all worked out. And you heard from us from Monique, who's our one of our guests from our first season. So that's pretty awesome. And yeah, she's interning on your show. Is that right?
Yes,
That's awesome.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes, yes. And speaking of shout outs, the staff of Look, Listen, and Learn, I think I mentioned them briefly, but oh my gosh,
Yeah.
they are so much the reason we are where we are. They are just a group of awesome, I mean awesome folks.
Mm,
They
that's
just
amazing.
knock it out of the park.
Amazing. Wonderful. Well, thank you very much again. I will let you get back to your probably very busy day, though I would love to hear more of your stories, maybe one day.
Maybe one day.
So, thank you so much, Val.
All right, Allison, be well.
Thank you for joining us for Take Notice Amplifying Black Stories. Please subscribe and follow us on social media. We are at Take Notice Podcast. It would really help us out if you could take a couple of minutes to review our podcast. You can do so through your podcast app or by visiting our website. It's takenoticepodcast.org. Thank you for your support. Take Notice Amplifying Black Stories is produced, hosted, and edited by Allison Preisinger Higgins with help from many. Music by Version Big 5 featuring Darius Higgins. Thank you for being with us, and thank you for taking notice.
Them saying that they're doing right, why they take away our human rights. They want to say they're on our side, with all of their smiles and their